It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast, and welcome to it. We got a big show this week. So, we will continue rewatching through the original trilogy, and we are on Return of the Jedi. Before we get to that, though, a few more EA Star Wars Squadron details to share with you. Celebration was canceled. Talk a little bit about that cancellation as it relates to the 2022 movie, because we have Rian Johnson Trilogy movie news to share with you. And I have the hottest of hot takes about Rian Johnson and his movies that he could do about Star Wars. Listener feedback this week, and then we have a very special after show that I will give you details on as soon as we get past the intro this week. It is My Nerd World, and you can go to mynerdworld.net to find out about all things My Nerd World, whether it's the podcast that you are listening to, concept art for the EMBARK science fiction space opera series, or the books themselves written by yours truly. The trilogy is complete. The audiobook for book 3 is on the way, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But you can go to mynerdworld.net. Now, let's get on with thy show.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
I am your host, Jon Justice, and I am glad that you are once again with a Star Wars podcast. This is your oasis in a galaxy far, far away to get away from all of the nonsense and the buffoonery that is going on in the world. And that's an understatement, right? Nah, man, we ain't going to talk about anything like that on the show. We're only going to talk about Star Wars. And I got something very special planned for much later in the show. So, as I mentioned in the intro, we'll talk a little bit about the EA game, Star Wars Squadrons, which I am really excited about. But just an observation about the reaction more than anything. I had planned on getting into great detail the gameplay trailer that was 5+ minutes long that came out this week. But a rather large rumor dropped that requires more attention than a video game does. But I will talk a little bit about the video game. Also, though, we have listener feedback. And then a friend of the show and frequent emailer, Brian Martin, had requested that I respond to a Reddit thread from Saltier Than Crate. For those that don't know, Saltier Than Crate is a very negative Star Wars Reddit page that I do not go to. But Brian Martin sent me somebody who was attempting to point-by-point take down the sequel trilogy. And he asked me, and we'll get into this, if I would respond to it. So I prefer not to do it in the show itself, because as you know, I like to keep things positive here because I love Star Wars that much. So what I am going to do is, after we get past listener feedback and we're done with the outro, we will do, as we've done before on the show, an after show. And in the after show, I'll tackle some negativity. I don't want to include it in the regular show, and I want to be able to give you listening who have an expectation that things are going to be positive here, and I'm not going to be pushing back on a lot of negative nonsense, even though I've done that in the past. I want to give you the option to avoid that if you don't feel like listening to it. I know a lot of people are tired about hearing the criticism of the sequel trilogy. The Rise of Skywalker has not been out that long, so it's still kind of fresh in everybody's mind. But I had a chance to look over this list that this person on Saltier Than Crate put together, and I think it'll be kind of fun. So again, we'll do that in an after show to this week's podcast. So that'll be coming up with listener feedback a little bit later on. So to kick things off, let's go here.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So this is going to be just an observation, and I haven't even really formed a really big hot take with this. This is just something that I observed. But as I mentioned a moment ago, StarWars.com and EA did put out a gameplay trailer for Star Wars Squadrons, and I am so looking forward to this game. I mentioned it last week. Everybody, if you listen to the show for any length of time, you know how much I love the spaceships in Star Wars, and that was one of the driving factors why I wrote my EMBARK trilogy, because I wanted to write stories about spaceships and space battles. So if anybody came to me and said, "Hey John, we're a game developer, and what kind of game would you like us to make?" It would be most likely this game right here. I've mentioned many times I can wipe out on Battlefront 2 for hours on end. So, like I said, I had intended to go through this point by point with the gameplay trailer that came out, but with this other news, I want to just touch upon one particular thing. StarWars.com did put out an article this week, Pilots Wanted, how Lucasfilm and Motive Studios hatched Star Wars Squadrons. Exclusive StarWars.com spoke with Lucasfilm's Orion Kellogg and Motive Studios' Ian Fraser about creating a new take on the classic Star Wars flight games of the 90s. I was never a player of those flight games in the 90s. I kind of got late in my later years. I got into gaming. I didn't game a lot when I was much younger. I never had an Atari 64, or I never had an Atari. I had a Commodore 64. At one point, I got a Nintendo NES later on when I got older, and then I've gotten the Xboxes since then. But I never played those flight games from the 90s, so I missed out on that. It is a really interesting read. And if you're into games, I would very much encourage you to go to StarWars.com and give it a read, because it really, really is, again, it's a very interesting read. The thing that I wanted to mention about it, though, is the reaction to the game has been really positive, which is cool. And this is going to play in a bit to my hottest of hot takes when it comes to the news, this rumor that came out from LRM Online, which used to be the Latino Review website, which is a pretty good website. They've broken some news before. But there seems to be a lot of positivity around this game, especially for individuals who played those Star Wars flight games in the 90s. But what I really liked was the excitement around the fandom seeing Hera and seeing Rey Sloane in the game. And what I like about this is it really does show the importance of the newer characters and the excitement around these new-ish characters. To me, it means a lot, and it means that despite some of the negativity and divisions in the fandom, which we've talked about at length on the show, it does mean that Star Wars has been growing. It is growing. It is reaching new audiences. And we knew this. I mean, we knew this already, but again, it's kind of tough in the world we live in right now, with so much negativity, even before all the things happening, all the turmoil going on right now. But I'm really excited as a lifelong Star Wars fan to see people getting excited about characters like Hera and like Rey Sloane, like what we are going to see coming up in the Mandalorian, in potentially this Ahsoka show, in the Cassian Andor series. I just watched Rogue One on a whim yesterday. I was really excited over the Star Wars Squadrons game, and I hadn't watched Rogue One in a while. I'm like, you know what? I really want to watch Rogue One. And I had watched Solo last week, and I just, like always, and I mention this all the time, you sit down, you focus on it, turn the lights off, and I had such a blast watching that movie last night. But I'm really excited that the fandom is excited for these characters and is able to move off of the original trilogy. I think we've been doing a good job of that, and Disney's been doing a good job of that. It'll be interesting to see if they ever go and revisit the characters that they gave us in the sequel trilogy. I pray they do, because I love those characters. I love the sequel trilogy. I think the sequel trilogy is incredibly underrated and takes a lot of heat for unnecessary reasons, and that it really tried to be bold and different and do something that was very different and separated itself from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. So, again, I just wanted to share with you my excitement around the fandom's excitement about seeing these newer characters. And to me, it just tells me that, the Star Wars, the Star Wars fandom is still healthy in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of growth that's available. And even with something that I'm not as excited about with the High Republic stuff, I think that's really, really good news for the fandom, because the fandom is willing to go and embrace new characters, and that's a good thing.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
So we got a couple of things that came out from LRM, and I want to share them with you. LRM Online. Rian Johnson's trilogy is still on the way. What's happening with Rian Johnson and his Star Wars trilogy? Read on for an exclusive rumor. Earlier this week, LRM announced that Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie wouldn't be releasing until 2024. That film will mark the first Star Wars movie following The Rise of Skywalker, but it won't be the last. Ever since The Last Jedi hit, fans have wondered whether Rian Johnson's announced Star Wars trilogy was in trouble. Okay, let me stop here. And let's focus on the Taika Waititi. I know that LRM is reporting that will be the first Star Wars movie following The Rise of Skywalker, and it very well may be. I know that some people are saying that makes sense because Star Wars Celebration is going to happen now because it's been canceled this year, 4 months before a potential movie would open, which was originally slated for December of 2022. And I've seen some individuals online point to, well, most likely that won't happen because Celebration is happening 4 months before the movie's release. And in my opinion, I would think that they would still want to put a movie out in 2022. And I think that Celebration happening 4 months before the next Star Wars movie after The Rise of Skywalker would be a very good thing, and the timing would be perfect. Now, it does make some sense, given how production has stalled on so many different projects, that perhaps Disney has decided to scrap that 2022 film. That is a long wait for another 2 years for a theatrical Star Wars movie. There was also some rumors going around, and I don't know what kind of value they had, but there were some rumors going around earlier this week that Disney is planning on doing this shared universe. And it is shared universe. Obviously, it's a shared universe, it's Star Wars. But somebody likened it to Game of Thrones and said that we're going to get different Star Wars live-action shows for Disney Plus that are taking place all around the same time that will interconnect with one another. So we would get... Now, that wouldn't be the case for the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and it wouldn't be the case for the Cassian Andor show, but it could be the case for The Mandalorian, an Ahsoka a shoot-off show, and potentially like a Boba Fett series as well. So there was a lot of talk, and they likened it to Game of Thrones, where you had a lot of different entities and a lot of different storylines taking place in this one particular universe and time frame. So rather than having it all happen within one show, like in Game of Thrones, they would divide it up amongst multiple shows. If you've watched the Mandalorian documentary series Gallery, which is fantastic. I haven't finished this week's yet, but it's one of my favorites so far because it's all about the connections that they made with the Mandalorian to the Star Wars content that came before it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that coming up. But with the volume that they're using, and the volume is the production room that they use that has they have these massive LCD screens, and they project the background onto the set, so you get everything in camera. That, to me, is really opening up the world of possibilities for Star Wars live-action shows to do a lot with a little bit of money and make some really great shows. Because for the most part, The Mandalorian's been shot that way, and you would never know that watching the scope of that show. So again, it could be true that Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie is the first Star Wars movie that we're going to get until 2024. That may lend a little bit of credibility to the rumors of multiple live-action shows that are interconnecting with one another. I still have a hard time believing that Disney is going to want to wait until 2024 to put another movie in movie theaters. But who knows at this point in time? Now, getting to the big rumor and the thing I wanted to talk about right now. Again, Rian Johnson's trilogy, okay? This is news that can either be good or bad depending on your view of The Last Jedi, according to LRM Online. From my source at Lucasfilm, the Rian Johnson Star Wars films are still on track and will be released after the Taika Waititi Star Wars film. Back in 2017, it was announced that Johnson would be writing a completely new Star Wars trilogy. It was after the release of The Last Jedi, fans and critics have become skeptical of Rian actually completing and seeing the trilogy come to the big screen, according to the article. Well, it has almost been 3 years since the release of The Last Jedi, and Rian is still at work on his trilogy, and it doesn't have to rush it either, according to his source. The pushback of the films will allow Johnson more time to flesh out the scripts. Since The Last Jedi, Johnson went on to write and direct the critically acclaimed Knives Out. It was so well received that it warranted a sequel that he is currently working on and will be released before the Star Wars trilogy. The article goes on to say, personally, I think that Rian will succeed coming up with his own Star Wars story without being handicapped by a previous writer or director. That's what I want to zero in on, because I have a hot take I want to share with you in just a moment.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
I have, and it's the hot take that I'm going to share with you listening right now in just a moment. The article goes on to say, I know I'm in the minority, but I'm hopeful of the new trilogy. Looking back at writing and directing The Last Jedi, Rian was in an impossible situation trying to continue someone else's story. Make sure to check back for more Star Wars information that I'm sure you're to enjoy. All right, so here's my hot take on this. Rian Johnson's trilogy could go and unite the fandom. I will guess that Taika Waititi doing a spin-off movie by himself is going to be a huge success. I think Taika Waititi is an amazing director. I won't get into repeating what I've said before on the show, but I think he did a fantastic job with the episode that he worked on for The Mandalorian. I love Thor Ragnarok, and I think his ability to craft action, drama, humor, and combine it all together is exactly the type of person that we want doing a spin-off film for Star Wars. I believe that a Rian Johnson trilogy could even take it further with uniting the fandom for this very reason, and it's what this person said in this article from LRM Online, and it was this, right? It was, personally, I think that Rian will succeed in coming up with his own original Star Wars story without being handicapped by a previous writer or director. You've got a couple of different factions that have pushed back against The Last Jedi, right? You had the people that just outright hated it. And that's mostly due to the fact of how Rian Johnson handled the Luke Skywalker character, right? You have people out there that didn't really care for it because they didn't really like the jokes or the tone of the film and thought it was a little too goofy. I have heard, though, even throughout all the various criticism of the film, a vast majority of individuals that even hated The Last Jedi have said that it was a beautiful film. It just wasn't a good Star Wars movie. And that Rian Johnson, they felt, would do a good job on his own doing new material in the Star Wars universe. I argued a couple years ago after The Last Jedi came out that Star Wars needs an eclectic visionary like a Rian Johnson. I think the Dave Filonis are really good for Star Wars. He obviously learned from the master. But knowing how to handle Star Wars and craft stories is different than knowing Star Wars and having sort of an artistic, bend to what you do and being able to craft something unique and maybe something different. And I think that a lot of the fans that hated The Last Jedi are going to be more than happy even to jump on board liking a Rian Johnson completely untethered to anything that came before story, because it will validate what they believed about The Last Jedi. See, these Rian Johnson movies are great, but The Last Jedi sucked because, as we see now, Rian Johnson was tethered to other material. I don't personally believe that, but I do believe that a lot of people in the fandom are going to be very keen on embracing brand new, fresh characters and storytelling in a different part of the galaxy to, again, prove their point of why they didn't like The Last Jedi. But what do you think? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. I want to mention, too, really quick before we move on to rewatching of The Last Jedi. If you haven't watched this week's Mandalorian Gallery, go and check it out. It's really interesting because it answers a lot of the questions that even I had about why Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni decided to choose the characters that they did without using existing characters, right? That was always the big question and all the speculation. Well, why are we getting a Mandalorian show when we have a Mandalorian and Boba Fett? Why are we getting a different Mandalorian? Why don't we just use IG-88 if we have IG? Why don't we just use IG-88 instead of using a new guy that looks like IG-88? They say in that episode very specifically that they wanted to do their own thing. They chose to grab. It's almost like they did it as an experiment. It's really interesting to hear Jon Favreau talk about it. You know, he thought he was being goofy's not the right word, but when they used the ice cream maker to carry the Beskar, and that's the ice cream maker, for those that know, that Willrow Hood held at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, when he's this guy that runs through one frame in the movie. He's running with an ice cream maker, and he's become something of legend within the fandom. And Jon Favreau says they wanted to grab an ice cream maker and use that. They wanted a character that he thought was goofy and ancillary in IG-88, and they wanted to get a character like that, but they made him IG-11. They specifically and intentionally went and chose to riff on things that came before, but make it its own thing. They chose to grab stuff from the Star Wars they all grew up with, but again, they were very keen to say, look, we wanted this to be our own thing. And I mentioned this last week that Jon Favreau even said that he's not necessarily inspired by George Lucas. He's inspired by the things that inspired George Lucas. So definitely go and check it out. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. I know that I did from just a little bit that I've watched, and I'm gonna, as soon as I get done with this, I'm gonna go and watch have lunch and watch the rest of it.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, now we get to rewatching Return of the Jedi. Now, I've talked about Return of the Jedi quite a bit on the show, and I've mentioned many times that if we're ranking films, which I don't do anymore because my opinions of the movies change so often depending on mood. Right now, again, The Rise of Skywalker is still currently my favorite Star Wars film. Return of the Jedi has always been kind of my least favorite. And it's been my least favorite for a lot of different reasons. It's been my least favorite because the locations, for me, didn't really do a ton for me. We went back to Tatooine again. I've never been huge on the creatures in Star Wars, even though I enjoy them. And let me preface all this by saying I do love Return of the Jedi. It's just not my favorite of all of them. The Forest Planet doesn't really wow me. I love the end space battle, right? I love the stuff on the Death Star with Palpatine and Vader and Luke. That's great. But the Ewok battle against the Stormtroopers never did a ton for me, right? That's just me. I have learned to appreciate this movie more recently and actually found myself doing something I don't normally do, and that is wanting to actually go and watch it again. And I think a lot of it's just due to my own desire to soak in space opera as I continue to write my own novels. But as I was prepping for the show today, I have another list of things that you maybe didn't know about Return of the Jedi. I took out some of the stuff that I think is pretty well known and just left in the things that I had never heard of before. But I came across an interesting observation, another hot take, right? Not the hottest of hot takes, but just a thought. Return of the Jedi really was, and this is some of the things that I complain about it, Return of the Jedi really was a sign of things to come. George Lucas pushed the limits of technology to make A New Hope, right? And did a ton of innovating on the way. And then they did even more innovating with The Empire Strikes Back. But they were more taking what they built and used in A New Hope and then sort of perfecting it for The Empire Strikes Back. When you get to Return of the Jedi, we're getting close to sort of another revolution or another evolution of filmmaking. We have some computer-generated type animation towards the end with the holographic image. We're still using matte paintings, but they're trying to be a little bit more aggressive, and it doesn't work every single time. There's good about it, and there's bad about it, right? The end battle is fantastic. However, you get things like an A-wing battle blobs. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that moment when the A-wing gets hit as it's flying towards the Super Star Destroyer, and it smashes into the control room, and then it ends up crashing down to the surface of the Death Star, right? If you watch that scene and pay close attention, you can see that there is no spaceship going into the control, the flight deck. It's just kind of a blob that moves through. And these films, I don't think they realized it at the time, or they would have done it differently. They weren't making films for like repeat viewings for some of these things, right? I think a lot of times in the absence of having the technology that's advanced to the point where you can pull something off, they try to get away with a lot of stuff. And that may work sort of on a single viewing of the average individual, but Star Wars being so consumable, upon multiple viewings, a lot of things pop up. I've mentioned this a lot. That matte painting they use when Lando Calrissian and Han Solo towards the end of the film say their goodbyes and they split before Solo gets into the shuttle with the main heroes and heads for the Death Star, and Lando heads for the Millennium Falcon. That's one of the most egregious, horrible shots in all of the films. That matte painting is so bad. But Return of the Jedi really was sort of a sign of things to come in my mind. This was George Lucas pushing the envelope again and seeing what he could accomplish. It is a film that I wish they would have done more with the special edition. They went so far out of their way to clean stuff up for A New Hope, and I really wish they would have gone in and fixed some of the because a lot of the matte paintings in Return of the Jedi just do not work for me at all. All right, let's get into some things you didn't know about Return of the Jedi, and then we'll get to the listener feedback and the takedown of criticism against the sequel trilogy. Most Star Wars fans know the movie was filmed under the title of Blue Harvest, Horror Beyond Imagination, to avoid publicity, but it's less known that the bogus title was actually a play on a 1929 novel named Red Harvest, which was said to be which should be an influence for Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, which was cited as an influence for Star Wars. See how it all kind of comes around full circle? This is pretty well known. Richard Marquand was not the first choice of director, or the second, or even the third. Steven Spielberg, David Cronenberg, David Lynch were all ahead of him in line. And again, I can't even imagine a Lynch or Cronenberg Star Wars film. The Ewoks occasionally speak Tagalog, although most of their dialogue is loosely inspired by Kalmuk, a language spoken in Mongolia. One of the Ewok songs was once believed to be in Swedish, with the lyrics translating wonderfully as, "It smells of cereal in here." But sadly, that was based upon people mishearing the gibberish of oversized rodents were singing, according to the article. The word Ewok is never actually said in Return of the Jedi, neither are the names of the individual Ewoks, even though they appear at the end credits. The name Ewok itself is derived from the Native American tribe of Miwok, indigenous to Northern California redwood forests in which the Endor scenes were shot. Endor comes from the Bible and is a village visited by King Saul before his final battle with the Philistines. Oddly enough, it also makes an appearance in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings as an elvish name for Middle-earth. The Ewoks were a late addition to the Star Wars mythology. Their part of the story was to be played by Wookiees. Basically, Lucas just ended up chopping them in half and making them Ewoks. And this was because Chewbacca could fly the Millennium Falcon and could repair the ship, so that made Wookiees sort of more advanced in technology than he wanted them to be. So he ended up making Ewoks. It was either amazing planning or more likely complete coincidence, but one word C-3PO says to the Ewoks is Naboo, which of course is later revealed in The Phantom Menace to be the homeworld of Luke and Leia's mother. When the scenes of post-victory celebrations around the galaxy were added in 1997's special edition re-release, it was less a case of George Lucas tampering and more a case of fixing something that was missing from the original version of the movie. Lucas and co-writer Lawrence Kasdan had wanted to show Coruscant, the Coruscant celebrating the end of the Empire originally, but unable to come up with a name for the city, they dropped the idea entirely. It was only after Timothy Zahn came up with the name in his Heir to the Empire novel that the Imperial capital actually had a name. Yoda was to sit this one out, but he was added after consultation with child psychologists made George Lucas decide that he needed an independent character to confirm Darth Vader's claim that he is Luke Skywalker's father. Now you know why Yoda doesn't do much for the rest of the movie. In the radio adaptation of the movie, the broadcast on NPR in 1996, Yoda was played by John Lithgow. The reasoning behind the switch for the title Revenge of the Jedi to Return of the Jedi is murky, with various motivations given by various people at various times. One story has it that the switch returned the movie to its original title after Lucas temporarily changed it when Kasdan complained that Return was too weak. Another has it that the change was made to differentiate the movie from the second Star Trek film, which was filmed under the title The Vengeance of Khan. Vengeance later became Wrath because of Revenge of the Jedi, according to those involved with the Trek production. The third story says that Revenge was never the movie's title at all, but Lucas announced that it was purely to mess with those making counterfeit merchandise. You know, I don't know how much I believe with that because they actually had some merchandise that made it out with that on there that was sanctioned by Lucasfilm. Carrie Fisher's infamous slave girl outfit was reportedly a stylistic response to her alleged complaints that the outfit she wore in the first two Star Wars movies disguised the fact that she was a woman. The voice of Bosch was also done by the same woman that did the voice of E.T. in E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The shots of Darth Vader's funeral pyre were shot last minute, long after the end of initial filming and close to Lucas's home at Skywalker Ranch. David Prowse, the unusually tall actor who played Darth Vader throughout the series, did not film any of the lightsaber battle sequences for Return of the Jedi. Instead, he was replaced by stuntman Bob Anderson. Anderson, considerably shorter than Prowse, wore platform boots. It's a trap, which is arguably the most famous line in the movie, was, incredibly, not in the screenplay. The line was scripted as, "It's a trick," but was later changed in post after a test screening because, let's face it, "It's a trick" just doesn't have the same ring to it. This one is really interesting, and I've heard this said many times. During the writing of the film, Mark Hamill speculated that the film would include Luke Skywalker's turn to the dark side and eventual redemption, but it's unclear whether this was wishful thinking on his part or a plot point that was generally considered. I know that Mark Hamill has said that he had a different idea and different incarnation for Luke, and there has been a lot of discussion around the fact that Luke would go to the dark side for a while in Return of the Jedi. I just find that fascinating in the wake of all the continued criticism about Luke Skywalker's handling in The Last Jedi. And again, Rian Johnson taking all the heat for that, because that was J.J. Abrams that isolated Luke on that island. Rian Johnson just came up with the reason why, and by the end of the film, we ended up getting the hardcore, full-on Jedi Luke that everybody was wanting and ticked off that we didn't get in the first half of the film. So I don't understand the criticism. Don't at me. Another idea abandoned early on was having Obi-Wan Kenobi return from the dead. It did, however, make it into an early draft of the script. Because an early version of the film was to end with Luke walking off alone, leaving his friends behind, a true gunfighter samurai fashion, which again is very interesting that was an initial idea that Lucas had, and kind of what we got with the isolation of Luke in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The idea was dropped in favor of a happier ending, reportedly because Lucas feared a downbeat ending would throw a wrench into the printing press from which truckloads of merchandise flowed. Okay. Let's see. One more abandoned idea. There were rumors that the final scenes were to mirror the ceremony of the Star Wars finale, but instead of Luke, Han, and Chewie getting medals, we'd witness the marriage of Han and Leia. Although this never happened, their marriage did become a part of Star Wars canon and serves as a basis for developments in the comic book and the spin-offs. The arms holding the lightsaber in the poster for Return of the Jedi, and this is actually the one that I have on my wall behind me, are not Mark Hamill's, as most assume. Those are Lucas's guns holding up the weapon. So there you go. There's some facts about Return of the Jedi that you may not have known, so you can now go and wow and amaze your friends with them.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And we have arrived. Listener feedback, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. Of course, you can always email, or you can always leave a comment on YouTube as well. And then email is good if you want to join the mailing list. The mailing list is good because I keep you updated on things going on with the podcast. And also, I share cover art for books that will be released later this year, being written by yours truly. I do not spam in anybody with it. But it is a means to help grow my mailing list when it comes to writing more books later on. So leave me a comment, and if you email me and are not on the mailing list, just say, hey, John, put me on the mailing list, and I would be more than happy to do so. All right, and the first listener feedback this week comes from Brennan Marr, and he says, hey, John! Exclamation point. I was watching The Empire Strikes Back the other day, and I got to thinking, if I were to use the same attitude that many online pundits use when they review, doing that thing with my fingers, the sequel trilogy to review The Empire Strikes Back, perhaps the most beloved Star Wars film, you could probably come up with a list of complaints / nitpicks as long as the movie itself thoughts. Brennan, you are 100% correct, and I've made that comment many times on the show. As a matter of fact, it's funny, I should have found it for the podcast because it would have been relevant to what you asked. But there was an article that was put out many years ago before Twitter, and it was basically somebody taking down bit by bit Return of the Jedi and how it was simply a rehash of what we got in A New Hope, you know, starting from the opening shot, another Death Star, and on and on and on. So people were already doing that. They just didn't have the means to anonymously throw it out on Twitter or make YouTube videos to try to drive clicks so they can make money from AdSense. But you're 100% correct. You could just as easily take down the original trilogy the way the sequel trilogy has been taken down. All right. Friend of the show, Rick, says, hey, John. A while back, I emailed you about Luke's lightsaber in Return of the Jedi. You kindly wrote back, I was listening to your latest podcast, and when you were reading listener emails, I wondered if you had read mine on a previous podcast. I checked the date of the email. I went back to listen to the podcast, and you did read my email. Cool, thank you. Now I'm somebody. That was awesome. You were always somebody, Rick. Another question. I don't know if you watched the show Psych. It's a really good, funny detective show. The first episode of Season 6 starts with Sean sneaking into a mansion, James Bond style. He has to sneak into a kid's bedroom and steal a Darth Vader action figure. It belongs to another kid who hired him. Anyway, the action figure is a vintage Darth Vader with double lightsaber. I kept thinking that's impossible, since there weren't any double lightsabers until The Phantom Menace. So I'm just wondering if I'm right about that. Did the first Vader figure have one? Well, thanks again, Rick. No, what they are referring to, Rick, and thank you for the email, what they are referring to is the original Darth Vader from 1977 action figure had a double lightsaber or a telescopic lightsaber. Telescoping. So what it was is, for those that don't know, it was not a double-bladed saber like Darth Maul. It was regular lightsaber, and it was permanently attached in its hand. And it had a red plastic tube on it, but then you could also pinch with your fingers the top and pull out this other little strand of hard plastic to extend the lightsaber. So they ended up calling that a double lightsaber. So that's why they were looking for it. So the show Psych was actually correct. All right, one more, and this is going to kind of play into the after show. Actually, as a matter of fact, I'm going to hold off on this because this actually does fit nicely into the after show listener feedback portion of the show. So as I mentioned at the start of the show, I have a couple of emails here that are kind of getting into the negativity in the fandom. And for those of you that come to this show because you like the positivity of the show, I thank you. We don't ignore the negativity in the fandom, but I don't like focusing on it either. But on occasion, I get some specific requests or comments that are really good, and I do want to share them. But for those of you that don't want to hear the negativity and are tired of hearing people complain about The Last Jedi or the sequel trilogy, then you can skip it. And this is the portion of the show where you and I can go and say goodbye. And I'll say thank you so much for checking out the show this week. If you want to support My Nerd World and a Star Wars podcast, and you have not yet, please go and pick yourself up a copy of the EMBARK trilogy, mynerdworld.net. You can hit on the yellow and black link right there on the homepage. It'll take you directly to the Amazon page that has all 3 books in the science fiction space opera trilogy. Good versus Evil. A ragtag group of pilots and friends throughout the course of the trilogy have to push back against an evil entity and Supreme Commander Sent Argum as he attempts to take over the new populated galaxy after a global catastrophe forces humanity to have to evacuate Earth. It is in the style of Star Wars in terms of age range. If you have kids that can read Star Wars, you can read my EMBARK series. They're a lot of fun. There's a lot of action, a lot of heart. And if you want to support the show, go pick up your ebook, your paperback, or your audiobook. The audiobook for The Vanishing War comes out in just a few weeks. I am uploading it today for approval to Audible, so that will be available. Also, right now, you can pick up the ebook for EMBARK for just 99 cents to get you into the trilogy. So go on by, again, mynerdworld.net and pick up your copies of the book for either you or a friend. You can gift them to a friend right there on the homepage. And if you have already purchased them and you enjoyed them and you have not left a review, please stop what you're doing right now. Stop the show. Go to Amazon and leave me a positive review. I need all the reviews I can get. All right, so that wraps up the official show for this week. Again, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. is the email address. And for those that want to stick around, again, we'll get into some after-show listener feedback and talk a little bit about the dark side of the fandom. But for those that are saying bye-bye, thank you so much for checking the show out, and I'll talk to you again next week.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.
And welcome to the after show here on My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast. I'm glad you're here. Let's get into it. All right. So, first one comes from friend of the show, Miranda Alice. And she writes this. Okay, I know this does not seem like the right place to have such a rant, but we made it the right place because this is the after show and there's no rules. But my gosh, did I see something right now that really ticked me off. Just now, when I was watching AT-AT's chat and the recent video, I saw a section where you see other videos on the side or below if you are on your phone. And I just saw what has got to be the most, let's say, classic example of how horrid and despicable fandom discourse is today, and about, you guessed it, the sequel trilogy. Shocker, in today's topic. They are, doing that thing with my fingers, dumb movies for dumb people. Yeah, that was the name of it. I will not disclose the author because I don't want to start something that might escalate into something ugly, which we don't need right now. This would not come to a surprise a lot of times. This is a comment you see in the random comment section. But to have a full video of it, which I did not bother to watch, but I know where it was going. When you are presenting it to the world, does the thought not occur that it's not going to tick off, offend, and alienate a number of people? Of course it does. That's why they want the clicks. It's one thing to say that you do not like a movie, that you do not like an entire trilogy. But say I won't give you a hard time if you don't like it, or if it's the other way around, you like something or the whole thing, it's fine if you don't, and I won't give you a hard time. But insulting people's intelligence by declaring that in a video form to the whole world when there's already groups that act on this vile behavior on a daily basis and have a free-for-all, the only thing I could say is get help. I apologize if this came off a bit off topic and sounded negative more than usual. I'll take this down later and write a different comment, but I wanted to get it off my chest. This is getting old. It's so 2018 and 2019. Now, Miranda, I'm glad you wrote it. You put it in the after show so we could talk about it here. And thank you so much for writing in, as always. I appreciate it. All right. Next comes from Mr. Moz. Mr. Moz has the hottest of hot takes. I'm just going to say it, and I don't care how hyperbolic this makes me sound. I think many of the sequel trilogy haters are genuinely a bit mentally ill. I mean, why the hell can't they just move the hell on and let it go? This goes far beyond some fanboys disliking a few movies. They're obsessed. Yeah, man, I don't get it. I really don't. But there's a lot of money to be made, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. There's a lot of money to be made off this nonsense when they talk negative. That ain't me, man. All right, so this brings me to Brian Martin. Brian Martin emailed me, and he said, hey, would you mind reading this on your show and taking it down and commenting on it, okay? So, and Brian's a regular listener of the show, and I really appreciate it. So this is why I decided to put it in an after show, because I don't normally cover this stuff, but this is kind of fun. So this was put out by somebody on Reddit on the Saltier Than Crate page, which I don't frequent, by RevBladeZ, okay? And it's titled, so I'm just going to go through point by point and share you my thoughts. I've read through some of it, but not the whole thing. Why people won't appreciate the sequels years later like they do the prequels. First off, let's start here. Is it so hard to say, in my opinion, this is why people won't appreciate the sequels? This goes back to what Miranda said. So much of this stuff, look, people, you have your free speech, man, and I have so much respect for that. You can say whatever you want to say. We live in a free country, damn it, right? Okay. That being said, is it really that hard to just go, in my opinion, and not do these broad generalities that are supposed to go and comment and relate to a wide swath of people when art is subjective? So why not just say, in my opinion, why people won't appreciate the sequels years later like they do the prequels, okay? Instead, this is why people won't. Okay. So this is what RevBladeZ had to say. You hear sequel fans say this a lot, but I think they just assume that because it happened to the prequels, it must happen to the sequels too. But I don't think this will happen. Prequels are getting appreciation now because the people are starting to notice qualities in them that they always had but didn't notice before. Qualities the sequels don't have. Okay, let me stop here. Because the sequels have different qualities. Because the sequel trilogy are different movies than the prequel trilogy. I do agree that people, in retrospect, hindsight's 20/20, they go back and look at the prequels and they see sort of a broader picture now that you have all 9 movies done of what those movies were trying to do. They still get the criticism that they do justly deserve with some of the wonky dialogue. That being said, I personally am of the opinion, and I could be wrong, that when it comes to the sequel trilogy, it's going to be appreciated a lot more than it is right now in hindsight. I personally really do. I think the sequel trilogy did something really unique and special in crafting that whole dyad story and the way that they laid that out in The Rise of Skywalker. It was fantastic. They go on to say, this may be the biggest one. The prequels were based on one man's creative vision, who had a clear idea in his head for what he wants to do in each episode. The sequels lacked this. They just had each director do what they wanted for each episode, and the result is a mess. Okay, your opinion. I don't believe it was a mess. And guess what? They did what George Lucas did. And we've chronicled this as we've been going through the past few episodes of Rewatching, that George Lucas was a bit of a pantser, sort of, making it up as he goes along, flying by the seat of his pants. He had a general outline for where he wanted those movies to go. He ended up making part 1 of his longer outline, because originally the original trilogy was going to be one story. And he basically took the first third and made it A New Hope. But we all know the changes that he made along the way when it comes to Leia, and Luke's relationship. There was a ton of changes. And again, we don't even know for certain how much was put out there. It's pretty clear now that the main focus in the A plot of Rey and Ben Solo was the core of the movie, and that was respected in all 3 films. And when you go and you watch the documentary for The Rise of Skywalker, even though they brought J.J. Abrams back, I'm very much of the opinion that one of the reasons why Chris Terrio got dropped was because he was not adhering to what was originally planned, what was started with the connection between Rey and Ben, what was then propelled and enhanced and built upon in The Last Jedi and then paid off for in The Rise of Skywalker. The prequels do not try to undo what came before. With TFA, it feels like they were really trying to undo the prequels. Hence the first line of the trilogies, this will begin to make things right. Or that could have just been a line that relates to the beginning of telling this particular story and letting the audience know from the get-go that 30 years down the line, things have turned into a mess, because that's what happens. Look at the country right now, for crying out loud. We've been through this turmoil before. Go watch movies from the 60s and 70s. If you get worried about all the divisions in the country right now, just know, man, these things are cyclical. We've been through this before. It's bad right now, but the country's been in bad places before, and we've recovered from it, right? TLJ, on the other hand, felt like it tried to undo everything that came before, almost like it was made by someone who hates Star Wars. The Rise of Skywalker felt like it was trying to undo The Last Jedi. This attempt to just undo what came before really damaged the entire trilogy. Prequels, on the other hand, were trying to expand on what came before and not undo it. And that is complete 100% subjectivity. Because I could spend another 50 minutes on top of the 50 minutes that I've already spent looking at the sequel trilogy and making all the connections that it makes and how it actually does it rather brilliantly. Even with what Rian Johnson did. Rian Johnson is an incredibly brave filmmaker. Kathleen Kennedy is an incredibly brave producer. And Disney was incredibly brave in Bob Iger allowing them to do what they did in The Last Jedi. I know it may not seem like it now, but to the whole premise of this thread by Rev Blade Z, you watch the future is going to look back on this sequel trilogy in such a different light in the wake of all the negativity that we've been seeing now that the saga's done. Especially given the fact that what Rian Johnson did was he stressed the fandom, but the fandom needed to be stressed, and nobody ever talks about that. I know we don't like it, and I don't like it. We would love everybody to just love Star Wars for what it is. But without going through some hardship, right, you never grow. And Rian Johnson took a big risk and did some really, really brave things, relatively speaking, when it comes to Star Wars filmmaking and storytelling. And that will be looked upon fondly as the turning point for Star Wars under a different entity than George Lucas. The prequels did not invalidate the achievements of the original trilogy, though granted they were kind of incapable of doing that, being the prequels. In TFA, Han has undone his development in the original trilogy and is a smuggler again. Leia is again leading a small group rather than a galactic government. And then the whole Republic is destroyed in a single stroke, as little sense as it made. Again, that's subjective. That's what happens in life, man. Not everybody stays together. And it actually makes more sense. I'll argue it makes more sense that Han and Leia didn't stay together because they're two completely different people. They were leading two completely different lives. And after 30 years, people change, man. And things, a lot of people go back to doing what they do best. And that's exactly what they said in the movies. The prequels expanded the universe to a great extent, and they had great world building, arguably even better than the original trilogy. It truly made the galaxy seem massive. Sequels, on the other hand, did very little to expand the universe. World building is nearly non-existent in the sequels, and it makes what is supposed to be a massive universe feel tiny. Again, subjectivity. Let's look at it from the other stretch of the imagination, right? No, it actually grew the galaxy quite a bit. We go to amazing new planets and see new locales. Right? There's a new planet in Jakku. It's still a desert, but we see a new planet on Jakku, Takodana. The Hosnian Prime system, we didn't know about that before. It gets blown up. In The Rise of Skywalker, we go to a bunch of great places. We go to Pisana. We go to Exegol. We find out it's the hidden Sith home world. In The Last Jedi, you may not like Crate, but it was a pretty rad planet. Or you may not like Canto Bight, but it was a pretty rad planet. You may not like Crate, but it was pretty cool too. Give me a break already that the world building is nearly non-existent. I wonder if these people actually went and saw the film more than once. This is John Unhinged. Prequels have their own identity separate from the original trilogies. Sequels do not. It's just Rebels versus the Empire again, only with different names, and it's like, being like the original trilogy went ahead of everything else in this trilogy, including making sense. Again, it depends on your perspective. When you get to The Rise of Skywalker, you begin to realize, oh man, this was Palpatine's plan all the time. Yeah, it was a lot like the Empire because Palpatine was behind it the whole time. Did they even watch the movies, for crying out loud? Prequels came out before the use of the internet and social media was widespread, and thus it wasn't as easy to discuss them and find out things about them he didn't notice, but others did. Not so with the sequels. He actually makes the point of why people are complaining about the sequel trilogy and they didn't before, because we didn't have the ability to pitch a fit about every little minute detail before. Not so with the sequels. There has been more discussion about The Rise of Skywalker in the month after the release than with the Revenge of the Sith a year after the release. Almost everything that could have been said about the sequels has already been said, and most of it ain't good. But the point is, just like we said before, if you had the internet around the original trilogy, you would have seen just as many complaints. If you had the internet around, definitely during the prequels, you would have seen just as many complaints. None of the prequels have a story revolving around a planet-killing superweapon, which at this point became the laziest Star Wars story one could come up with. The planet-killing Star Destroyers are arguably even worse than the Sun Crusher from Legends. At least that one was one of a kind. Again, man, it's all a matter of perspective. I love the fact that they tried to go and do another Death Star being the bad guys, and then it ended up failing. So what does he go with? Thousands of Star Destroyers with planet-killing weapons on them. I think it's awesome. And again, comparing it to the sequel trilogy is not a fair thing to do because of the nature of that storytelling and how it was different. The prequels have extremely memorable and well-choreographed lightsaber duels and large-scale battles. Even if you don't like the story, it's difficult not to at least enjoy the action. The action in the sequels is forgettable and poorly choreographed. Only TFA had some decent stuff, but even that wasn't too great. Okay, again, all a matter of subjectivity. The action in the sequel trilogy is fantastic. The Falcon versus TIE Fighters on Jakku is fantastic. The First Order versus the Resistance on Takodana is fantastic. The end battle going against Starkiller, where they do a riff on what they did in A New Hope, but it's different in a different way, is fantastic. The opening space battle in The Last Jedi is one of my favorite openings of any Star Wars film, next to the opening of Revenge of the Sith. The lightsaber duel with the Praetorian Guards and Kylo Ren and Rey is arguably one of the best, most well-choreographed lightsaber duels in all of the Star Wars films. The lightsaber duel with Kylo Ren and Rey in The Force Awakens is fantastic. Then you get into what they did in The Rise of Skywalker, and it's amazing. The Force fight on Kylo Ren's Star Destroyer versus Kylo Ren on Kijimi. The lightsaber duel that takes place on the Death Star 2 wreckage is fantastic. I, again, just completely disagree. Prequels have some of the most memorable music of the entire series of cinema in general. Duel of the Fates, Battle of Heroes, Anakin's Dark Deeds. Sequels have to be some of the most forgettable John Williams music ever made. And again, I completely disagree. I love the Rise of Skywalker soundtrack and what John Williams did. I think the Rise of Skywalker soundtrack is arguably the best soundtrack that he's ever done next to The Empire Strikes Back within the Star Wars universe. The themes that he came up with for that film are fantastic. It is epic. The prequels don't have Rey, the most fan fiction tier character ever put into a big budget film. Nuff said, NUFF writes. Blade Z, what's his Yahoo's name again? Rev Blade Z. All right, everybody's entitled to their opinion, okay? And that guy is entitled to his. Brian Martin asked me to give a point-by-point retort to what he said, and there I just gave it. Which points to this. All of that is to say this, right? You listening quite possibly could disagree with everything I said 100%. That is totally fine. Because art is subjective. It just is. Right? We're all individual people, and we can all make our own individual decisions. Unfortunately, we live in a society right now where, there's a lot of people that want to control a lot of different things right now, and that's wrong. And when you look at art, and we'll just talk about Star Wars, it's subjective, man. One person's amazing Ewok battle is another person's, it's made for children. It's okay. If we can just learn to accept that and move on with life, we're fine. Now, I don't necessarily feel bad in taking down this particular dude's saltier than crate list of reasons why they believe people won't appreciate the sequels years later, right? Just as much as I wouldn't care if he listened to it and they came back and tried to take down everything that I just said, because it's all just a matter of opinion, and that's cool. Nobody's one opinion about any movie is right or wrong except for that particular person. All right, that officially wraps up the the show this week. Once again, I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, please support the show if you haven't picked up any of my books yet. The greatest technological advancement ever made has gone missing in EMBARK Book 1. Earth is at risk, and the hunt is on to find the only hope for humanity's survival. In Book 2, they survived a planet-wide apocalypse on Earth. Now, Taft and his friends on a far-off world must unravel the mystery of a lethal threat to their new way of life. And then Book 3 wraps it all up in all-out war, and the only way the Raider Alliance can stop the ruthless galactic dictator is the truth. The question is, will humanity in a far-off world believe them? MyNerdWorld.net is where you can get the books, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Support the show. Get your copy today. It brings warm feelings to my heart after I put the show out, and I can see that people went and picked up the books, and I really hope you like them and you leave a positive review. All right, that wraps it up officially. I hope you guys enjoyed the show this week, and I'll be back again next week. Until then, may the Force be with you always.
My Nerd World.